Okay, that's a good sign. Preparing to live stream the meeting. Welcome, everybody. This is a really tiny group here, but we are live streaming because we know this webinar will find its audience. I'm Renee Hobbs, Media Education Lab. I am here with an amazing I would say, a lifetime thought partner, Faith Rogo. You have been a lifetime thought partner for me. And welcome, Tara Zimmerman, and welcome, Steve Tetreault. Uh, since we are a small group, I'm just going to say once I
Hey,
check.
that's a good sign.
Okay, it is recording. And so let's get this show off the road. I guess maybe what we do is a little emotional check-in as we begin this program. I see Amy Cassidy's entering the waiting list. Faith, I'm going to make you a co-host, and Tara, I'm going to make you a co-host. And we're just going to do the five-finger check-in, almost the best way to do it. If you're having an absolutely kick-ass day, that's five. And then maybe it's a good day. Okay. It's like, it's not a great day. And oh my God. Okay, you're alive, but just barely. So, how many fingers are you right now at this moment in time? Put your fingers up. No judgment. Excellent. And I'm a five. So hey, we got some
Wow.
happy people who are here. Uh, so glad you're a part of this. Scott Moss, you're just joining us, and we just did an emotional check-in, and we're all having a pretty good day, putting up either four or five fingers. So Faith and Tara, take it away.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started and then I'll turn it over to Faith here in a minute. So welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Tara Zimmerman. I'm an assistant professor at Texas Women's University. And this is just a project that I have been working on for a couple of years. And shortly into the process, brought Faith Rogo alongside as a mentor and curriculum writer. And so we just want to share a little bit about the Awareness and Critical Thinking, or the ACT program for media literacy. So this is a project that we developed specifically to look into how school librarians can teach children to detect and avoid misinformation. So just a little bit about my background is that I was a school librarian for 9 years. And then I went back and got my PhD and got really interested in misinformation. And so when I started thinking more about all of this, I thought, boy, if we could teach children when they're really young, before they develop bad habits, before they get into bad routines, they'd be so much further ahead than we are now as adults trying to catch up. So that was really the motivation behind this. And in my research, which I began in 2017, already at that time, we were finding that misinformation was spreading more rapidly than ever. And specifically, that school-age children's inability to judge the accuracy of online information was making them particularly vulnerable. I was also struck, not in the research, but in my own experience, by being out and about in life and seeing children on screens younger and younger and younger all the time, and thinking, waiting till middle school to educate children about online misinformation is too late. So definitely there's been a call getting louder and louder over the past several years that there is a need for critical thinking and digital literacy curriculum to combat misinformation. And then librarians, who are specialists in information literacy, are really primed to be the expert in teaching this. So I applied for an IMLS grant. That's the Institute of Museum and Library Services, if you aren't aware. And I got a 3-year early career research grant. And the first thing I wanted to do is, it didn't seem to me like there were any programs out there helping librarians or teachers do this, but I wanted to make sure. So I did a survey to find out what the lay of the land was. a national survey of school librarians serving kindergarten through fifth graders. And through that survey, I found that there was just a really wide variability in how librarians were teaching information literacy. Some of them had, were spending lots of time and lots of focused effort on it. Some people were doing just bits and pieces here and there. Some were hardly touching it at all at this age. And so we also found that there was limited instructional time given to these librarians to spend with these students and insufficient resources. So they didn't have a curriculum. So the people that were active and were teaching this were having to kind of cobble together their own materials, a little bit from here and a little bit from there, and adapting things that were really originally meant for older children to try to make it work for these students. So the implications were that there was indeed a critical need for a national level information literacy curriculum for K through 5 students, and that school administrators, parents, and other stakeholders in the community need to understand the importance of developmentally appropriate materials for young learners. This is something that for everyone may not sound, and it may not immediately click as a need. What are you talking about? Misinformation and these young children? It seems like that topic is a little too dark, a little too advanced, but we're talking about the underpinnings of the critical thinking that they need so that as they progress, not to mention the fact that they're seeing things probably that we don't realize online. So this is what we found. This is kind of that formed the basis of the need for this research. And so in year 2, we had, at the end of year 1, we pulled the curriculum together, wrote it. And in year 2, we did a pilot program with schools. So what we did in the curriculum development, and Faith will talk more about this, but I specifically relied on her to put pencil to paper, as it were, and use her expertise in the field of early childhood media literacy to put together engaging lessons. And she really focused on an inquiry-based approach, which we know really fosters critical thinking in students, and focus on student-led inquiry and flexible instructional methods. So I was emphasizing to her, hey, what I'm seeing out here is that you may have one librarian who gets an hour a day with each class, an hour a week with each class on a pretty routine schedule, and they can plan something long-term. And you may have some that get 5 and 10 minutes here and there, and it's sporadic, but they don't want to give up. They still want to teach something. So how can we make something that's flexible like that? And the ultimate aim really was fostering a culture of critical thinking. So we did a pilot test after we got the curriculum written, and we did this in 3 different states: Texas, New York, and Oklahoma. And we did this in 8 different school sites that were serving over 600 K through 5 students. And of course, as I've been emphasizing, the lessons that were taught in these sites had to be modified to fit these different schedules and grade levels. So it wasn't like we were able to go out and initiate a test where everyone taught it exactly the same and every student that saw it had the same experience. That just, sorry, Amber Alert, pardon me. That just wasn't feasible. And so we had to work with what we had. So there was a lot of variability in the way that it was implemented. And we asked these librarians, who were recommended by their administrators as people who were already very successful in this space, who were very engaged, who were eager to try this new technique. And they were asked to just incorporate these lessons when and as they could throughout the year. Some of them would have the same students all year for short amounts of time. Some of them were on like a quarterly rotation where they would every quarter get a new batch of students that they would see more often. So it was really, really different. And then we gathered feedback from the librarians as well as from the students on the specific lessons that were taught. And then we just did some high level interviews with the librarians about what they experienced as well. And so we took that information and we revised our lessons. And then since then, we have partnered with Project Look Sharp to host the curriculum on their website, which this is one of the ultimate goals of the project was to have this available at no cost because libraries do not have much budget, particularly for things that are not books, right? So some literally have almost no budget. They're fundraising for things, and like things are just not going to get implemented in a broad way if they are going to be costly and if that's a barrier. So that was one of the goals. And just a little bit of background here too. This was about 18 months into this 3-year grant. And this was in March of 2025 when we were notified that these grants were going to be canceled or unfunded, whatever the proper term is. And that was very disheartening. But we worked fast. We worked with what we had. And by the time the grant funding ended, we had this up and running pretty much so that we could move forward. And so Faith and I are committed to trying to complete this project, even though our funding has been removed, just because we're passionate about it. And we really believe that this has something to offer our students as well as our teachers. So I think at this point, I'm going to turn the program over to Faith.
Yeah, Tara, why don't you just keep sharing and I'll just
Okay.
when to switch the slides, it'll be easier.
Sure.
So there are about 20 lessons, and this is in the format where we didn't get to do the year of revision with additional input from across the country that we had hoped, but we think there's still value here. I want to spend some time, I can't do all 20, but I want to spend some time describing the design process of how we did it. But before I do that, just for folks who are kind of tuning in, who want to check this out, this is the homepage of the project on the Project Look Sharp website. And just a couple things to look for. If you go to that left-hand side, those two yellow-looking innocuous buttons are not so innocuous. They're actually really important. They have great information behind them. So one says before you start, and that's where all the background information is, how to use the lessons, how they're designed and why they're designed, how to do inquiry-based education. All of that is in under that button, including a little bit of an explanation of when you actually look at the lessons, you'll see that the descriptions of the lessons look like they're really text heavy. This is not a scripted curriculum, very intentionally not a scripted curriculum. But what we did try to do was to help educators who were kind of new at this get through that dilemma of, if I'm doing inquiry-based education, most of what I want to be doing is asking questions, but I'm dealing with kindergartners through 5th graders. So there's a certain amount of telling that you also have to do, that there's kind of background information you have to fill in. And we wanted to help people navigate so here's when you should ask, and we've posed possible questions you could use as prompts. And here's what you should just tell them. Just give this information so that you can move on and get to the point of the lesson. So there's that in there. The second yellow button is quick links. And that's where you'll find a list of all the lessons by grade level and linked to each lesson. So if you're just looking for 1st grade lessons, you just go to that document, and 1st grade and all the lessons that are appropriate for 1st graders will be there. And also there's a file we've provided of Google Slides of all of the media used in this. and a link to all of the handouts that were developed for this. So very easy, quick to use resources. The other thing about this homepage tells you about the way the project is kind of organized. So rather than a scripted curriculum, it's interconnected activities, and those activities can be done in any order. And that's where the blue boxes come in. We identified 7 areas that are, we call kind of skill areas, although it's also knowledge, but we have skill areas. And those reflect how we approach the developmentally appropriate way of doing this kind of education. So we tried to think through, well, if we want them to be news literate when they're in middle school, what are the foundations for that? What are the foundational skills that underlie the kind of critical thinking or the ability to verify sources and think about source credibility and all of those kinds of things that we think of as standard media literacy that oftentimes are not taught until middle school or even high school or sometimes even later. We think we can build a foundation the same way we do about with traditional literacy, right? We don't wait until middle school when they can deal with more complex texts to start teaching them to read. There are foundational things we do, right? That's what this is. So there are 7 areas that do that. And if you can go to the next slide. One more. There it is. Okay, so if you clicked on one of those buttons, you'd get a page that looks kind of like this. Don't worry, I know the text is really tiny. You don't need to read it. I just want to point out what's there, what you'll find there. So this is the facts and frames one. And the first thing you find up top is a description of what the area is. Here's what this is about, why we're doing this. And then right below that is student outcomes. And they're divided into knowledge and skills. So here's what they'll learn, and here's what they'll be able to do at the end of this. And then under that, here's one of the unique pieces of this. Here's how to incorporate what this area brings into your daily routines, right? Without a separate lesson. Just here are regular practices you could do that would support students acquiring the skills that we've just named up above in those learning outcomes, right? So we describe the routines that you might be able to do that would be supportive of this. And then below that, you get to, and here are the activities that teach this in a major way. And then because this is designed as interconnected stuff, beneath the initial activities where it's the main topic of the activity, there are also activities that touch on it as reinforcement. So if you've already done one of the main activities, you might look at one of the reinforcement ones and say, oh, we're doing that and it'll be about a separate topic, but I can also remind them of what they already learned or practice what they already learned. So that's how this whole thing is organized. That said, let me begin to see if I can very quickly take you through a couple different lessons so you get an idea of how these things are designed. And if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. So here's one of the developmentally appropriate things we identified was if you want people to be able to assess source credibility, at some point they have to understand, well, what makes an expert? What makes somebody credible in something? And we decided to tackle that for this age group by using pairs of slides. Each slide features the same celebrity, but one of the slides, they're selling something that they in fact are expert in. And in one of the slides, they're selling something else. So this one is Steph Curry, the basketball player. And that one on the left is actually in the form of a social media post. So you could begin to address that style. What is that, right? As a piece of media. And he's hawking a basketball skills video series. And in the second one, he's selling Subway sandwiches. It's just and the activity starts by helping students see, well, you already know a lot about expertise, actually. If I asked you who's the person in your class that you would go to for, and to help you be a better soccer player, or to help you master that video game thing or whatever, the kids can tell you, right? They're like, oh yeah, they're really good at that, right? And you can help them explore, okay, how did you make that decision? What makes them really good at that? Are they experts, in that? What makes an expert? So we start very often by helping kids see what they know. So there's a metacognitive kind of facet to this, but also valuing it in a way that a lot of media literacy curricula in particular don't. That a lot of media literacy curricula are all about, look at how this fools you. You're really naive, you don't know anything, and it positions kids as victims. And that's not a good way to teach at all, anything, ever. So so we really want to, kind of get to the piece where kids in our daily practice, we're affirming that they actually can master this, that they can gain confidence in this. So we don't have to do the lecturing of them. So even in this ad kind of comparison thing, right? Used to be, I'm going to say it's old school now, even though I know a lot of people are still out there doing it. Look at how these ads use celebrities to attract your attention and sell you with the idea of, oh, if you want to be like this celebrity, then you would use this product. And this would get to the same conclusion as that, but in a very, very different way, and in a way that leaves kids with skills that can be, and knowledge that can be applied to other things. So what they're being asked is, so in which of these examples is Steph Curry actually an expert, and how do you know? And that's what they would discuss. So then we can go from there. So once they get that concept, so then we can talk about, so why do you think Subway would hire, and for the littlest ones, we can say, he's not just saying that to be nice, he was paid to do this, right? We can do those kinds of explanations. And, so why do you think they would do that? Why would they pick him? He might really like Subway sandwiches. I don't know whether he does or he doesn't or whatever, but that doesn't mean he knows what you like as a food. And so we can do those kinds of explanations from there. So it gives this underlying skill set of, well, what makes somebody credible? And that's what we want to get to in this activity. And almost all the activities that do things like this have more than one example, so kids can practice, right? That's also missing in a lot of current curricula, especially for younger kids. They're kind of one-offs of like, okay, we'll explain this to you once, and then we move on to something else. That doesn't work. We know as educators it doesn't work. If we want kids to really master this and get good at it, they have to be able to practice. So let me give you another example of how these kind of intentionally begin to overlap in different lessons. So this is a different activity, and the activity is called What to Do with Clickbait. And the first example is this example you see with the puppies. And there are a couple different ways that we can present this. So one is, when we say the activities are layered, they're layered within themselves. There are lots of different things you could do with it. So one of the things that happens, you put the puppies up on the screen and everybody in the room goes, ah, right? Aren't they cute? Well, that's an emotional reaction. And we can help then kids discuss through, oh, that emotional reaction. When we're making decisions, if we react from that emotional place, how's that different from when we're analyzing things critically? And then we can begin to help them explore that line underneath it, which says, you'll never believe what people did to these puppies, right? Also trying to evoke emotions. There's even an exclamation point there. So I could do an English lesson on, an ELA lesson on, well, punctuation and what does an exclamation point mean? And how does that fit into that emotional? So that's one way you could use this particular document. A second way would be, is it real? And if it's not real or it is real, does it matter even, right? We do almost none of the, is it real? Here's how you can tell. Oh, this is a little fuzzy over here, or there are 6 fingers over there. Right? There's a little bit of that, but you know what? I don't know, maybe even as soon as 6 months from now, that will be irrelevant. I mean, the technology is getting better and better. And so we need to talk about discernment skills that aren't just that careful observation of this looks fake, right? That's not really what we're after. So that's why we might add that does it matter kind of discussion. So that's a whole other thing we can do. And then we could deal, and this, so what we're asking is for the educators who use this to make judgments, right? Then we can do a whole assessment of, well, are those things age appropriate for the groups that you're dealing with? And also, because we're doing different things, you can do them at separate times. You can come back to that slide. Remember, we looked at this last time and we talked about emotions. This time we're going to talk about this form of media is called clickbait. And we can introduce that vocabulary because it makes it easier to talk about. We don't do vocabulary lists just for the sake of vocabulary lists, right? It's only when it makes it easier to talk about that we have a shared common understanding of what we're talking about. And in this, what we do is, instead of just lecturing them about the dangers of clickbait, we don't do warning education. It's, you're an actor in this, right? You have some agency here. Would you click? And then we have a list, if you knew. So would you click on this if you knew that this was going to go to a website encouraging people to donate to the SPCA? And we can stop and discuss that as much or as little as we want. So if you have 5 minutes, you can just do that one bullet, right, at that point. Or maybe you decide that's not appropriate for the group I'm working with. I'll skip that one. I'll go to the next one. And the next one is, would you click on this if you knew it was an offer to get more pictures like these? As long as you gave them your information, your contact information. And then we can discuss the whole privacy thing and that lesson, right? And just so you get the idea of why there's a whole list here and how that makes it more flexible. The others are, would you click if it would connect you with others who like this picture? And it clicks to an invitation to join a group called the Doolittle community, which doesn't actually exist in real life. We just made it up. Maybe some kids who have read a lot might know Dr. Doolittle or have seen the films, right? They maybe that'll spark something in your discussion, but it doesn't matter if it does or it doesn't. We can talk about dangers of the community then, but they get the choice of would you click on this or not. And the last one is, it takes you, well, actually there are two. It takes you to a file picture of your aunt and uncle's new dog kind of thing, and how you might check on that with relatives or parents, of, gosh, does that seem right? And the other one is, it goes to something completely irrelevant, not related to the picture at all, because that's often what clickbait is, right? And would you waste your time that way? So that's the clickbait exercise. You get an idea of how we do these things often in lists. If you go to the next slide, you can see how we begin to connect it. Here are the practice examples for this. And oh, by the way, just so you get an idea, there is a whole worksheet on when you encounter stuff online, do you decide to share it, challenge it, report it, or skip it, right? That you have some choices here, and there's an opportunity to practice those. Let's go to the next slide. I know I'm running through this really quickly, but if you have questions, we can deal with them later. So here's a whole other lesson. It's a lesson about numbers as context. I call them touchstone numbers, the kinds of things that we want kids to be able to analyze things like news and sources and things that involve numbers. What would they need to know about a number to know whether that number was kind of accurate or not? And one of the things they need to know is the context of the number. So the name of the lesson is 7 a lot? And the question that we have them ask is the number, whatever the number is, a little or a lot? Well, if you're talking about planets, is 7 a lot? Yeah, well, planets in our solar system anyway, right? It's a lot. It's most of them, right? But part of what we deal with in that exercise is another example of clickbait, and it's the picture there on the left of and this is all over clickbait, various kinds. I asked 5 chefs to name the best potato chips, right? And they all said the same brand. And then we can talk about, is 5 in this context a little or a lot? And how would you know, right? Another thing, just so you know that it's there and how we connect to curriculum, we created this kind of newsletter article that's about a community considering whether to fund a dog park or not. And it has all kinds of numbers in it. The number of people who show up at the meeting, the number of council people who there are, and how many votes the proposal actually gets. You can see there are some charts there. So there's math connections that way. There are civics connections because this is a community meeting and a council meeting, and they need to make a decision and what benefits the community. But it also touches on that touchstone number thing, because you need to know if you're going to say, well, are the number of people who spoke in favor of the dog park, is that a little or a lot? And you need to know how many people live in the community before you can answer that question. So it helps them figure out. Now imagine that every single educator in a school building decided to work with their students to figure out what touchstone numbers were important to them for what they were studying. And they started to make posters of them and keep them on the wall. So if you do that, right, then you don't even need to take teaching time anymore, right? The touchstone numbers quickly go up on the wall. They stay up on the wall for however long you decide they stay up on the wall. Could be all year, could be a couple of weeks or a semester or whatever it is. Kids will walk away knowing that number. So if you're teaching civics to 5th graders and you're dealing with the national election, one of the numbers they absolutely need to know is, well, how many people are there in the United States? Or at least how many citizens are there in the United States? How many voting? And maybe both of those numbers, right? So you put those up on the wall and then they know them. But in the meantime, they've learned to ask, well, what would I need to know to answer? And they would learn to question sources that they come across that don't give context for the numbers that they use. They imply, oh, look at how many votes he got. He got 1,000 votes. Well, you know what? If you're running for president of the United States and you get 1,000 votes, that's not a lot. If you're running for student council in your building, that's probably really a lot, right? Probably so much, it's not even true because there probably aren't 1,000 kids in your elementary school, right? So you get the idea there. Let's keep going. Just a couple other examples just to give you a feel for this. This is probably one of the more predictable ones in terms of, you would think, you know, real or not real kind of thing. But here's how we do it. We do it really differently. So in that picture on the left, what we do as we're helping kids think, well, is this real or not? And how could you find out? We help them go through a set of questions and then the pros and cons of each way, each strategy of finding out. So the first would start with their own knowledge. If they've already studied animals and they know about camouflage and stuff, is this likely to live in an environment like this? It's not camouflaged at all, you know, those kinds of questions. And it goes on through, you could ask people in the school building, you could ask people you know, you could write to a website, you could do, and it ends with doing a reverse image search, which is a skill you can teach. And it goes through, helps kids go through the pros and cons of each of those. And again, it's a list. You could do each of those separately. You could do them over a month. If, you know, you're meeting with kids 4 times over that month, do one each time, whatever. The other thing I wanted to point out about this one, 2 things. One is the language that we use from real life or a movie. That's on purpose as opposed to real or fake, because especially with young kids, what we don't want to do is devalue fantasy. Pretend play is essential in early childhood. It is the way kids learn about the world and learn about themselves in the world and work through where they fit in and what makes sense to them. So we have to be really careful not to make fantasy seem like a bad thing. Fantasy is where we get this sense of wonder, right? So that's very intentional. And in fact, one of the blue button section areas is fact or fantasy, right? So not just telling the difference between fiction and nonfiction, but within fiction, telling the difference between fiction and fantasy, right? So we do the group of pictures there because developmentally you can do that in a bunch of different ways. You could break into small groups and assign one to each group and they can research it on their own. Is this real or not real? Or you can scaffold it enough to say, only one of these isn't real. Which one do you think it is and why? You know, and go that route. So it offers you a lot of flexibility in terms of developmental approach at all. And by the way, for those of you who are wondering, it's the one on the top right that isn't real. All of the rest of them are real. So again, we want to have this be a joyous, media literacy shouldn't be a downer, right? Education is fun. Education is rewarding, this inquisitiveness and curiosity and all of that. We want to promote that. So that's going to be important. Let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to turn it back over to Tara.
Okay, thanks so much. So you can see some of the lessons as Faith has shared these. They're very interactive, they're very fun. And after the lessons, we asked for feedback from students and asked for librarians to share that back with us. And then we asked the librarians what they were seeing in the classroom, how engaged were students in these lessons as compared to other types of lessons they might be teaching. What kinds of questions were the students asking? Were they seeing differences? And so just as a top level, our findings, and remember, this was with 8 schools. So this is our pilot test. They did report seeing higher student engagement. They reported seeing students, you know, with their eyes glued and pointing out different celebrities or different things that they recognized. And they were very much interested in the visuals, particularly. There are a lot of videos. We didn't go into that here, but we do use a lot of videos, which the kids enjoyed. They began to see increased critical thinking just in the small amount of time they were using this with their students. The kids, you know, quickly were catching on to, wait, but who made this? And you know, they were able to start asking those more thoughtful questions, even at really young ages. And one of the things that just really was highlighted to us through this process was the power of culturally relevant media, because some of these lessons could be taught in a lot of different ways with made up characters, with all kinds of things. But by using things that the students recognize that they perceive as relevant in their world, in the world in general, it really captured their attention. So specifically, the different media types. Like you'll see here, this is not just a picture of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson lifting weights. It's clearly a screenshot of a YouTube video. And they will point things like that out. They recognize that layout. You'll see this is a social media post, the Taylor Swift one, you know, that was probably on Instagram. And then the products as well. So using the combinations of the different media types, the personalities, like the Steph Curry and then the Taylor Swift and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson here that students recognize, made it very engaging. And then the products. So there are some great lessons, which we didn't have time to go into here today, but you know, you can imagine along the same lines that Faith was going earlier, like Fruity Pebbles, does that have fruit in it? Let's think critically about that. So she has some, you know, why would they use cartoons on a package like this? Just some really thought-provoking questions for students. But all of this from a research standpoint, we clearly have to acknowledge that our study has limitations, particularly, as I mentioned, in the sample size and in the variability of the implementation, because it wasn't implemented the same way everywhere. All the lessons weren't taught the same number of times. It's very hard to have objective data. But what we do have is qualitative initial results that allowed us to go back, do some revisions, and now we're launching on a national scale. So
Tara, can I ask you about that just a little bit?
Yeah.
Because I think that's so cool. I mean,
Sure.
the reality of it is variability in implementation is a reality whether we pay attention to it or not. And you say you know there was variability. So how do you know? How do you know there was variability in the way teachers and the way school librarians implemented this? How
Right.
do you
Yeah. So
how do you know?
we did a feedback form after each lesson they taught. And we asked them, did you teach this in one session? Or is this like a longer lesson that you broke up into 3 different meetings with this group? And you did the first, the middle, and then the end. Did you teach this lesson to 2nd graders? Or did you modify it a little and teach it to 5th graders? Did you have 15 minutes to teach this lesson, or did you have 45 minutes to teach this lesson? Because that's going to look very different. And so we collected all that data from them so that we could really see the variability. And it was really all over the board. Even 3 schools that we had in Texas that were in the same school district. So, same general policies, their schedules and needs were so different that theirs didn't even look alike. So it really reiterated to us the need for flexibility, but also the difficulty of creating a curriculum, because it has to be, just so flexible and so modifiable for the needs of the librarians.
Thank you.
Yeah. So where we're at now is we've taken those lessons, we've improved them based on some of the feedback that we got from the librarians. And now we are asking people to go out and teach these lessons, to use some of these, to implement them in your classroom. If you're a classroom teacher, you don't have to be a librarian. They can be used in so many different ways. So I'm sharing here the URL. We also have a QR code that you can click on, and it will take you directly to this page on the Project Look Sharp website. And we're asking for all kinds of feedback, be it positive, be it negative. Really, we just want to hear from the frontline users. And I want to show you how to get to that. So if you go to the website and you click on one of these blue boxes, it will take you to the next page. So like, for example, if I click, if I click on the habits of inquiry, it's going to pull up this page, and all of them look like this, all the different numbered skill areas. And there's this big blue bar at the top that says, if you use this lesson's materials, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Click here. And when you click there, all it does is ask you to enter your email address, because Project Look Sharp isn't tracking what lessons get you, they're not tracking people's information. So we're asking people to opt in to say, hey, yeah, I did use these and I'd love to give my feedback. Then I can use those email addresses to contact people with a survey form, asking them, what lesson did you teach? What did it look like? And those kinds of things. So please try this link. Please share this link with anyone in your network who you think might benefit from it. And we're really just trying to, like I said, our funding was cut. And so we're trying to find all the ways that we can to get the word out that this exists, to continue to grow and improve it on our own.
Cool.
Yeah.
I bet everybody in the room has a question. So can we open, and since we're a small enough group, we don't need to break into breakout rooms for this. Would anybody like to ask a question or make a comment? I have a question, which you knew I would, right? 2 questions, actually. One is with this project, you are competing with the gorilla, the 800-pound gorilla in the living room, and that is Common Sense Media. And so, how do you understand this work in relation to the 800-pound gorilla? And then my second question is, schools need to check a box every year for E-rate certification that they are teaching digital citizenship. Does your work align with that conceptualization of schools qualifying for E-rate because they're claiming this is a education for digital citizenship?
Faith, do you want to take that, or would you like me to?
Sure. So, in the digital citizenship thing, we haven't quite framed it that way. Initially we wanted to just go in and see if we could do something almost this complex and have it be useful, or would it just be so confusing, folks wouldn't be able to do it, or it couldn't be implemented. But as we revise the curriculum based on it actually being used out there, it would be easy to point out, and here are the pieces of it that fit into specifically digital citizenship. There are lots of them. In terms of your first question, Tara, can you actually go? We wrote a breakout question.
Yeah.
If you go to that, yeah.
Okay.
So, for me, the question is how we create a demand for the curriculum and practice that match the field's rhetoric about critical thinking. Because if you ask the common sense people, do you address critical thinking? They'll say yes. But if you look at the pedagogy behind what they provide, the answer is no. And that's a little severe. They're a little bit better than that. But the truth is, it's not an inquiry-based pedagogy that they use. And if you're not using an inquiry-based pedagogy, it's really difficult to build critical thinking skills. So what they've done is they've put out a set of disconnected lessons that address specific topics and in ways that provide a knowledge base that's really easy to measure. And it all comes in a nice little box. And, you do this lesson and then that lesson and then that lesson. And I am sure that they will have evaluations or research that say, oh, yes, we taught kids privacy and how to, protect their information online and what to share or not share. And see, they learned that lesson. To me, that's not the same thing as having the beginnings of a foundational skill of somebody who's actually information or media or even digitally literate, let alone a digital citizen. So there is value, I think, for some schools in the common sense curriculum. But if what you're after are students to graduate from your district being media literate, the common sense won't get you there. We had hoped that fully funded, this would be able to provide an evidence base saying, look, here's this really flexible thing, but it requires a lot from the educator. And I don't have the answer about whether that's feasible or not. I don't know whether, there isn't a school I've ever presented in where they weren't using common sense. And they're using common sense because they think it's easy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's one of the questions we have at this point.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, the idea that Faith mentioned several times that this isn't a scripted curriculum presented a challenge even for our participants in the pilot program who were very active, really wanted to be involved, but they don't have time to prepare for an hour for that 45-minute lesson. They don't have that much luxury of time. And so those scripted lessons, even though they're more simplistic, even though they're not as engaging for the students, were easier for them. So that was something we heard, like, oh, those are easier. But they also said, once we did this, we got better results with our students.
Mhm.
So it's a
Wow.
conundrum.
Wow. Fascinating. Other comments and questions? What questions do you have for Faith and Tara? Some people say that the reason why this pedagogy is so challenging is that kids have so much to say, and this becomes kind of a classroom management problem. Librarians and teachers say, like, kids actually want to talk about popular culture, they go off topic. It's basically kind of they get too excited. It's like, you show a picture of some of the stuff that you showed us, and kids don't see that shit in school, right? So classroom management issues, a concern to you or an opportunity? How did you experience that in your pilot study? What's your take on the way in which genuine critical thinking lets kids out of the box, sort of?
Yeah, what we did hear about that is that that's exactly what happened, that students were very interested. They were very wanting to tell about what they saw on TV last night, what they saw on their iPad, what they saw here and there. And I think it was because of the quality of librarians that we had in our pilot program that were recommended by their administrators, who were super engaged. They were experts already in this field. So they were able to be very agile to, they were old timers for the most part. They'd seen it, they'd been around, they could handle that kind of thing. Whereas a newer teacher or a less confident teacher, I think, could be overwhelmed by that.
Great, it's a great research project for when the administration changes and the IMLS returns to normal. God help us if it does. It will be a great project to investigate.
I also just said, I'm trying to remember who it was now. Maybe the former head of the Harvard Graduate Education School or some such person, but who said basically, if we want kids to be interested in critical thinking, we have to be interested in their thinking, right? In their thinking. If we want them to be interested in doing this, we have to be. And that means schools are going to need to figure out a way to let students talk. I don't know how to get around that. It's like, if this excites students about stuff they want to talk about, what we have to train our educators to do in the digital world is to harness that conversation and say, great, I have them talking. There are lots of opportunities when students are talking to get back to stuff I know I need to cover in the curriculum, whether it's a math connection, whether it's a vocabulary connection, whether it's a logic connection, whatever it is, to be able to know how to engage that has to be one of the skills of an educator.
Right, right.
When I, this is Scott, when I did this with kids, when they, well, first of all, I would just say that if you do it over and, repeatedly, it gets better. I have been in situations where kids lose their minds because you're discussing popular culture or something that they like in class. And one of the things I did, and maybe this will make me sound a little bit like a jerk, but say something like, uh, I really want to talk about this, but if you all, can't keep it together, we're not going to be able to do this stuff in
Yeah.
class anymore. If you, completely lose your minds if we talk about whatever, Mickey Mouse or whatever it happens to be. But I guess the big point is over time, I find that gets better. And another thing I did too, when I did have that concern in my classes, is sometimes I would kind of start with media that they didn't love and then kind of move into, things that they did.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's another thing about this curriculum design, I think, that we've provided lots of media examples because we want to make this as easy to implement as possible. So it's just at your fingertips, you can use them. But we all know that this stuff doesn't stay evergreen.
Right.
But if you get the concept that you're trying to get across, like the slide pairings, if you can find slide pairings of somebody who means something to your students, you can use it and do the same lesson. It doesn't depend on you doing one with Taylor Swift, right? And that's going to be important both because we are such a culturally diverse country. So not everything is going to resonate with every group of students, but also that it stays evergreen in practice, at least over time.
Yeah, and speaking of cultural diversity, I wanted to bring up another point that came up in our pilot study is that we had a couple of mid-South states, Oklahoma and Texas, and then we had New York. And when I asked, because the word misinformation itself has become a hot button in some places, and libraries in schools have become contentious in some places. And so I asked the librarians, were you worried about someone questioning, why are you teaching this to my students? You know, thinking that it was inappropriate. And my folks in Oklahoma and Texas both said, yeah, there were times they were teaching in October around the election. And they were like, I really kind of pulled back and I made sure to not use anything that could even remotely be misconstrued as political because it was such a hot topic. Then our librarians in New York said, opposite. No, we have parents going to our school board saying, what are you doing about this? What are you bringing in to the schools? And so again, that's kind of another challenge where we talked about the variability, but the different needs and the ways different communities and regions are accepting and eager to teach this versus maybe a little more reluctant.
Wow, fascinating. Oh my gosh. What a great observation. I didn't even think about how, part of the research is like this stuff might land differently in different communities. Cool. So happy to hear that you're thinking about that. And in some ways, it seems like you probably designed, although Faith, you said it's not evergreen. You designed it to be a little bit evergreen, right?
Yeah,
Because
I
like
meant that
5
the
to
media
10-year-olds
examples.
are 5 to 10-year-olds, right?
Yeah, the media examples won't be evergreen I mean, we tried to pick some and create a bunch that we think will be, puppies will always be puppies.
Right.
you know,
Yeah. And
so,
weird animals will always be weird animals.
yeah, so
But the celebrity stuff might change, that's for sure. Oh my gosh. Oh, I can't wait to introduce this to my librarians in Rhode Island. I think it's absolutely cool. I'm really intrigued at the names of the lessons. Can you talk to us just in the last minute or two? These lessons have unusual names, and I think you must have thought very carefully about what to call these units.
I don't know that I thought about them as weird. It was just kind of as descriptive as we could be, or as often as we could, putting the question that we want kids to learn and to say. So a lot of this is about that routine thing of repeating questions. So, asking about facts and frames and things. Well, anytime you're talking about framing, you're actually asking the question, so what's missing that might be important to know? And
Do you think a school librarian who's never encountered media literacy could still use this lesson? Why or why not?
if they read the stuff, I hope so. But yes, I think training is going to be a part of it, and I hope that we'll begin to get that in education schools. But we'll see. Or librarians.
And that's a great point too, because we didn't just dump this on our pilot librarians. We did a half day, or was it a full
Ah,
day
uh-huh.
training with Faith.
Awesome. Okay, got
Yeah.
it. That helps me understand. So like you said, they were experienced and they were enthusiastic and they were
And
prepared.
received training. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, that's magnificent. Oh my gosh, how glorious. Well, listen, here's the thing. I'd hope that if you're here, it's because you recognize how needed this resource is in the community. This link to the YouTube video will live on, and it might be useful for you to share that with your friends. Thank you for being part of this, Faith and Tara. Thank you for joining us, Petra, Steve, Scott, and Valerie. And we are just thrilled to be able to bring new resources like this to our audience. So Thanks for being part of it. Yeah. And, check out what the Media Education Lab is doing. Next week, we have more webinars. And the week after that, we have more webinars because we are an online learning community. And thanks for learning with us today. Bye now.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
That was great. Great, great, great. And Petra, so great to see you, my friend. How are you? Mwah. You look marvelous, my friend. You look marvelous. Turn your voice on.
Yeah, no, I was looking for my audio. Probably because I retired.
That's good. Gives me something to look forward to. Just saying.
Yeah, and let me know. I mean, sorry about joining late, but I was coming from somewhere. That's why I didn't weigh in. But if there's anything we can do, because some of my old collaborators are still out there working, so.
Happy to hear that. And we just finished this big project with the state of Massachusetts and the K-5. One of the findings of the report is there needs to be a deeper, bigger investment in K-5. So here you are, the two, big K-5 media literacy people in my life. Let's see what we can bring to Massachusetts this year. All right. I'm going to just take a great picture of you while you're here, because maybe there's a webinar that brings you together. Maybe an in-person event in Boston. Who knows? All right. Let me think about that a little bit more.